Apple unveiling new products at its Scary Fast event, including the lineup of its M3 chips. But that's not all for Apple this week, of course. Tech giant representing about 7% of the S&P 500 is also releasing its financial results this week. And this comes after a mixed reaction on Wall Street from big tech earnings thus far. Here to discuss this is Ben Bajarin of Creative Strategies, CEO and Principal Analyst. Ben, it is great to see you. Let me start off with the news here. So Apple introducing the new M3 chip family. These are the processors that are going to be powering the new MacBook Pro laptops and the new iMac. And so, Ben, my first question is that enough, Ben? Do you think that's going to be able to drive meaningful sales here?
Yeah, I think one of the most important takeaways is that we've had a really soft PC market, obviously coming off a tough comparison from sort of the COVID pull forward that we saw, and that was clearly reflected in 2024 sales for Apple. So I think we're starting to see life of that recovery as shown by Intel's earnings, that we're seeing now more momentum carry into 2024 for PC category sales, which Mac fall into. And so I think they did a lot to make the Mac more attractive and more competitive, as they've been typically on a good run rate to take share in the high-end portion of the PC laptop market.
Hey, Ben, it's Julie here. Apple did something unusual in the rollout of this event in terms of its timing. It was in the evening, last evening, I guess sort of a Halloween theme on the day before Halloween. Any takeaways from that? Were they trying to speak to a different audience? Were they just trying to be cute? What do you think?
Yeah, I think obviously the evening event fit the theme, but I also think there's Asian markets, China and Japan, that time frame catered to as well. Both of those, honestly, have been some pockets of growth relative to the Mac, not gigantic, but at least certain relevant audiences where they're continuing to see consumer interest there. So I think some of those time zone changes for a Chinese and a Japanese market was helpful, and probably one of the reasons why they made it later in the evening, which is more earlier in the day in those time frames.
And Ben, I want to switch gears here, talk about earnings. Apple reporting at the close on Thursday. And as always, Ben, heading into this report, we get all kinds of reports about how the new iPhones are doing. We have bullish reports. I've seen bearish reports. I'm just interested to kind of get your take. What do you think demand is like really for that new iPhone 15 family?
Yeah, it sounds like demand is still constrained. If you look at a lot of the research coming out around wait times, there still are significant lead times. Some of those have been easing on different weeks, but it certainly shows that there's still some sustained demand, at least for now. Again, the question has always been smartphone recovery and the strength of that market. We've been waiting to see signs that China is starting to come on board, and I think we're starting to see that market recover. And obviously, this is a particularly strong upgrade cycle for people who want the premium of the high-end devices. So that'll impact ASPs and gross margins, and I think everyone's expecting those to be maybe slightly up. But I think the big question comes into the holiday with, again, some of this concern over consumer confidence. So where Apple guides for the December quarter, I think, will be top of mind for pretty much everybody.
Well, and Ben, the sort of leaks, the indications that we've gotten, they haven't seemed great, right? Some of the indications out of China, some of the reports, some of the kind of tea leaves, if you will, on demand. I don't know. What's your read here?
I think there's a couple challenges. I mean, they are up against some supply constraints, particularly as they're moving to a new process technology for the high-end iPhone. So TSMC's 3-nanometer process. There's constraints there. So what we don't know is how many they're making. What we do know is there's a sense that there's still at least some elongated demand in those product categories. Now, again, whether that eases in the next 2 to 3 months leading into December, we'll see. But there is enough signs that there's been some constraint. But again, what we don't know is how many devices that Apple's made, and whether that's a significant enough number that these constraints equal a big positive versus just sort of a flattish year over year. That's why I think, again, looking at ASPs and gross margins will be very telling about if that upgrade base or new buyer base is skewing toward the higher end, which is what I think has been the trend over the last couple of years.
And Ben, I'm interested in your take on what is the long-term position and opportunity for Apple in China? You know, obviously it's a key link in the company's supply chain. It's a key end market, but you see Huawei making moves with its new smartphone. That's new competition. You see, obviously, Chinese authorities cracking down on Foxconn with this new investigation. Obviously, also just growing geopolitical tension between Beijing and Washington. How do you sort of think about Apple's long-term prospects there?
Yeah, no, and I think it's a good observation because you're right. I think competition is increasing again in that category. You know, you mentioned Huawei, who again I think is starting to reestablish itself in that market. Xiaomi remains to be, really strong with a lot of technologies. Foldables are actually starting to take some share there and become more attractive to a younger demographic and a more, kind of early adopter demographic. So there is a lot more competition there. I do think that that's a concern point that many people are watching on because, again, that's one of Apple's largest markets. So iPhone sales there, iPad, they're seeing growth in Apple Watch, and obviously the Mac as a continued opportunity there is a continued growth opportunity. But I think it's important to know, right, they are facing more competition than they've had in the last few years. And so I think that'll be really telling again to see what China looked like as a market in terms of revenue, and then also kind of what we get in terms of a guide going forward. But I'm sure, as you know, the strong market for Apple is around Chinese New Year. So it would be somewhere around, first calendar quarter where we'll really get a sense of the strength of how some of these products are doing in the Chinese market.
All right, mark your calendars. Thursday after the close, Apple reports. Ben Bajarin, thanks so much for joining us today, Ben. That was great.
Thanks for having me anytime.